Hey, thank you for joining me for our End Times Bible study. This is a study of prophecy in the end times called Revelation. We're eventually going to get into the book of Revelations, but we are first looking at the book of Daniel, which is really a key book to understand as we understand what Jesus taught in Matthew 24 and 25, as we understand what Paul was teaching as he wrote, especially in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. He also mentions it in Corinthians as well. And then also to understand the book of Revelation, the understanding the book of Daniel is of primary importance. Well, today we are jumping back into Daniel, and again, I appreciate you taking the time to join me and study through the end times together. Let's jump into this just with some quick reminders. All right, just a quick recap of what we had talked about before, and I don't want to talk a lot about this because you can go back and look at prior videos and understand a little bit more about this, but there were 5 visions that Daniel was involved in. The first vision wasn't really his, it was King Nebuchadnezzar's, and it was of a statue. The statue had 5 different components, actually had 4 components, but the fourth one and the fifth one kind of joined together. And so Daniel came in, he interpreted the vision, and the vision was about the empires that would exist in the Middle East. All of these empires were empires that were in the Babylonian, they were Babylonian empires. And that was the Persian empires, and that is modern day Iran. You can add into that Iraq. You can look at Syria. You can look at Turkey. All of these are Middle Eastern empires. The Middle Eastern empires of the day from the time of Daniel and the Babylonian Empire all the way to where we are at today. Now, these empires would all cover the same area. It would have been the Babylonian Empire, it would have been the Medo-Persian Empire, it would have been the Greek Empire with Alexander the Great, followed by the Ottoman Empire, and the final empire will be an empire that will be connected to the previous empire. So it has to be connected to the Ottoman Empire. And we know in the book of Revelation that this empire, the new empire, it will be an empire that was no longer, and then will be again. So it was a revived empire, a restored empire, and that will be a restored Ottoman Empire. If you look at the situation in the Middle East today and you ask yourself the question, who are the ones that really hate Israel the most? And the answer to that is that it is not the European Union. The European Union, though, along with our country, is more and more promoting anti-Semitism. There's more and more of a promotion of the idea of boycotting and divesting themselves from any connection to Israel. There is a movement afoot around the world to do so. But there's not the same bloodlust in our country or in the European Union toward Israel as there is with the Middle Eastern empires. Who are the ones that have bloodlust against Israel and want to see Israel wiped off of the face of the map? Who are the ones that will not bat an eye with the destruction of Israel? Well, that is all of the Middle East. Now, not every person feels that way, so I'm not going to lump every person together, but the leadership and the radical people in the Middle East are the ones that want to see Israel destroyed more than anything else. If you watch the news of today and the bombings that are happening in Israel, they are being celebrated by the Middle East. They are being promoted by the Middle East. These foreign countries, you see them making statements, the leaders of these foreign countries calling for jihad against Israel. In fact, the rest of the world jumps on the bandwagon because Israel is seen as the villain just for defending themselves, even though they're the ones that are under attack. And so you see these things happening. By the way, I don't think there's any greater proof in the validity of the Bible and the accuracy of who God is than the world events really surrounding this little tiny nation of Israel. This small little nation garners the world's attention more than any other nation in the world. That to me is just a proof and an understanding of the validity of the Bible. So it will be a revived, in my opinion, a revived Ottoman Empire. It will be a Middle Eastern empire because that is where all of these other empires would come out of. They were all over the same area of the Middle East. It will be a revived Middle Eastern empire because they're the ones that have the bloodlust, and they are the ones that the empire of the Antichrist will come out of, and they will come after the glorious land. They will come after what Daniel calls the glorious land, which we can call the glorious land as well. This is always the promised land given to Israel by God, the promised land. That is the one that this empire will come out of. That was the first vision that Daniel was given. The second one that he was given, or the first one he was a part of, he participated in, but the second one was given specifically to him, and that was Daniel's vision of the four beasts. That is in Daniel chapter 7. The four beasts represent again those same four kingdoms. These four beasts are coming out of the sea, and the four kingdoms would be the Babylonian Empire. It would be the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the fourth empire being the Ottoman Empire. That again, according to Revelation, it was an empire that was no longer, and was again. So it's a revived empire. Again, look at just recently what President Erdogan said in Turkey, and that is he is calling for a revived Ottoman Empire. And so this is not something that is just being made up by conspiracy. This is what people are actually saying in the world's events. Now, the fourth empire coming out of the sea, what Daniel saw, he said, I looked, there was a fourth beast. It was terrifying. It was frightening. It was tremendously strong. It had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed anything that was left. It trampled with its feet. It was different from all of the beasts that came before it, because this beast had 10 horns. Now, the 10 horns of this final empire are 10 kingdoms that will be apart. So it's a 10-nation coalition that will be made up of 10 countries or 10 kingdoms that will join together, and that will form the foundation of the empire of the Antichrist. So the empire of the Antichrist will come out of these 10 kingdoms. Now, what was different, though, out of these 10 kingdoms, out of these 10 horns, a little horn, so a little horn would rise up amongst the 10 kingdoms. So it's not a part of it. This little horn rises up amongst the 10 kingdoms, and the little horn attacked three. So this little horn attacked three kingdoms. So 3 of the 10 were attacked by the little horn. When that happened, he took control of those 3, and the other remaining 7 just bowed down to him. Now, this final little horn is the Antichrist, and that's the picture of the little horn is a wonderful. We have a wonderful type of little horn in the person of Hitler. Hitler was insignificant. Hitler was had no power, no authority, and he rose to power. Even in World War I, he was called the little corporal. He was not anything of power and authority. He wasn't born into this. He didn't come with a pedigree, but he rose to power as a little horn. The nation of Germany fell to him. He took control of this in several manipulative ways through several events that are happening, and then all of a sudden he did a blitzkrieg across Europe and took control of the majority of Europe, and that's the type, and that's what the Antichrist is going to be like. So that was the idea of this 4 beasts coming out of the sea. It represented the 4 empires: the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Ottoman Empire that was no longer, and will be again. So that little horn is coming out of this at the end times. So what you're going to look for is a coalition of 10 kingdoms, 10 nations that rise up, and then you will begin to see some little horn, some insignificant person who has no pedigree, who will rise up with power, will attack 3 of the kingdoms, take control, and then he will become the leader of this 10-nation coalition. Now, we will see this event. We will see. These things will happen before the end, before the tribulation, before any kind of a rapture happens. No matter where you fall on the whole theology of rapture, this is going to happen. We're all going to see this. These events that are going to take place. Now, the next vision that he had was the picture of, more specifically, was of the second and third empires. It would have been the empires that were the Medo-Persian Empire and the Greek Empire. Now, these two kingdoms were represented by a ram and a goat. The ram had two horns that represented the Medes and the Persians. The goat represented Alexander the Great. The Medes took over the Middle East. Then the Greeks came against the ram. They came against and took over all of that Middle Eastern area. Out of this Greek Empire, there was one main ruler represented by one large horn. That ruler was killed or died, and there were four kingdoms that rose up in its place. Out of one of these kingdoms is where the Antichrist will come from. So the future Antichrist will come out of one of these four different kingdoms. Now, we've looked at that, and primarily we are looking at either again, Iran, Turkey area, that most likely this is where the Antichrist is going to come out of. So again, look for the little horn to come out of the Iran or Turkey area, somewhere in the Middle East. You'll be watching for that, and that will begin to take place. Now, that was the third vision that he had. The fourth vision that Daniel had was the 70 weeks. That was the coming of the Messiah, when exactly the Messiah would come. And then he gives the final 1 week, and that is a final 7-year period, the 7-year tribulation period that will happen at the end. There will be one final 7-year period. So the way that the timeline would look is something like this. You had from Jesus, however long it's going to be, from Jesus, you will come to a point where it will finally be the beginning of the 7-year, the final 7 years. At the 3.5-year mark, you will see the Abomination of Desolation. All of the great tribulation events will happen in a 3.5-year period. At the end of the 3.5-year period will come the return of Jesus. Jesus will return, and he will commence the wrath of God. Now, once that happens, once Jesus returns and the wrath of God is commenced, then Jesus sets up his rule, and he will have a 1,000-year called the millennial reign, the rule of Christ. At the end of that 1,000 years, Satan is released from the lake of fire. Judgment is poured out on Satan and everyone. And then there is what's called the new heavens, the new earth, and the new Jerusalem will come out of the sky. So it will be really a going back to probably a Garden of Eden kind of situation, where there is a brand new heaven, brand new earth, brand new Jerusalem. God reshapes and reforms the earth in some manner, in some way of his making and choosing, and this is where eternity begins. We live with him forever in a glorified state, in a glorified brand new body, and living with God in perfection from that point on. So that's the timeline. So we are concerned here with this 7-year period, the 7-year tribulation time. Now, what we have been looking at then is the final vision, and the final vision that Daniel gives is really the vision of the Antichrist and what is going on when the Antichrist returns. So let's look at that together and dive into that here today. Let me recap what we talked about last time. So these events are broken up in this way. First, you have Daniel chapter 11, verses 1 through 20. These are all historical events. These are all the events that are taking place in the empires before the time of Jesus, before the Ottoman Empire, the final empire, would be even coming on the scene. This final empire was before that final empire, before Jesus. There are historical events that took place, and they are going back and forth. And this is in the trying to figure out who has control in the Middle East. This was after Alexander the Great died, and the four kingdoms that would have risen up into his place. Those are all the events if you read chapter 11, verses 1 through 20. And then we have this before the tribulation events that are occurring. That's in 11, 21 through 30. Then we have the during the tribulation. Now, this is what we want to talk about today. We're going to look today what's going to happen during the tribulation. When we say tribulation, when I say tribulation, I am talking the Great Tribulation. This is the 3.5-year final period. This is the events that are happening in the prior 3.5 years, or even before that. I mean, these things are taking place in the years leading up to that final 7-year period, but they potentially are in that final 3.5 years before the Great Tribulation, which is the final 3.5 years. And then we have some after tribulation events in chapter 12, 1 through 3. Now, after we have gone through that, then we have some specifics. We have details about the tribulation. We have the command to seal the vision. Now, I look at the command to seal the vision, and I connect that with the seals in the book of Revelation. Seal the vision, Daniel, and when we break the seals, the vision is going to be unleashed. We'll look at that when we get there. Then we have the length and the severity of the tribulation that will be discussed by Daniel, the sealed purpose of the tribulation, the transitional days after the tribulation, and then one final word of encouragement that is going to be given to Daniel in chapter 12 at the very end in verse 13. So we'll look at that over the next couple of sessions as we get into it. But today we are going to get into the events that are happening during the tribulation. Again, one final reminder from last time. The events that happened before the tribulation. Now, what I had said last time is that we have in our understanding of the end times events, we have a wonderful, what is called a type of Antichrist. And I referred to it last time that in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there's several different types of people. There are types of Christ. There are types of Jesus in the Old Testament. We have Joshua, we have Moses, we have Abraham, we have different, Jonah is another example. We have different people who represented aspects of what Jesus was going to do and who Jesus was going to be. In the same manner, we have ideas and understandings of the types of the enemy as well. Pharaoh is a type of the enemy, a type of Satan. The Antichrist is referenced in being a type, and last time we looked at an extra biblical resource being the book of First Maccabees, which was a type of Antichrist, was in the person of Antiochus Epiphanes. And he, if you study his history, he did the events that are talked about in verses 11, 21 through 30 almost to the letter. So we can look at him as a type of Antichrist. So as Daniel writes 11, when he writes 21 through 30 and he gets that vision, we can see that fulfilled in part in Antiochus Epiphanes, but in full in the Antichrist himself. And so what I want to look at just is some verses to remind us of where we were as we looked at the events before the tribulation. Now, these events could very well be the first half of the 7 years. So of the 7 years. So this could very well be the first 3.5 years are taking place in the before the tribulation events. Now, I believe also that these events are also going to start shaping up even before we get to this 3.5 year mark, but I could be wrong. Again, these are all open to interpretation. Only God truly knows the whole picture. We see it just in part, and we try to put the pieces together. But let's just remind ourselves of what Daniel chapter 11, verses 21 through 30 said. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read the final couple of verses. Let's look at it. So in Daniel chapter 11, in saying this, he's going to start here, and I'm just going to pick it up here in verse 25, and here's what he says. That the Antichrist, what he's going to do is this. He is going to, and there's this ongoing battle. There's an ongoing battle that is taking place in the Middle East. There's a lot of conflict that is going to happen during all of this time. And so there will be skirmishes, there will be battles. Again, look back to Hitler and his blitzkrieg across the European countries. It took time. There was battles that raged. It happened pretty quick, but it was still over a period of just a couple of years that all of these things would take place. Hitler was expanding his war machine all over the Middle East. He was moving, Europe. He was moving toward England, and a lot of attacking toward England. But he had taken over France. He had taken over Poland. He had taken over Holland, which is modern day Netherlands. He had gone north into Norway. He had been just expanding his empire. Well, those are the kind of battles we're going to see. We're going to see Middle Eastern battles that are going to take place over a handful of years. And so this could be a year. It could be a couple of years. It could be 3 years. I don't know, but there's going to be all kinds of strength, all kinds of skirmishes that are happening. So when we read 21 through 30, what we are reading is all of the skirmishes that are taking place these are all happening before the Great Tribulation. They're all happening before the final. And what is the Great Tribulation? That's the final 3.5 year period. It's what Jesus himself is going to talk about. I'll read that verse in just a few minutes. But here's what it says. This is the Antichrist. The Antichrist will summon his strength and courage against the king of the south with a great army. The king of the south will wage war with a very large and mighty army. So the Antichrist will be opposed. All of these countries are not going to bow down to him. They're going to be countries that are going to stand up to him. So where's the king of the south? Well, that could be coming out of the southern part of the Middle East. It could be coming out of the African continent. There will be a king of the south. There will be some kind of an army in the south that will stand up against the Middle Eastern empire, and they will wage war against them. And they will wage war, and it says, with a very large and a very mighty army. So there will be, again, think World War II on steroids. But this king of the south will not succeed because of plots devised against him. So the king of the south will wage war with a large army, will come against the Middle Eastern empire. I don't know what that army is going to be, where it could come out of. I mean, it could even come out of Korea. It could come out of India. We don't know where the Southern Kingdom is going to come from exactly. There are different thoughts and ideas, but there's going to be conflict. The king of the south cannot overcome the king of the north because there are plots that are devised against him. There's going to be internal strife. There's going to be plotting against him from the inside, and the king of the south is not going to be able to defeat the Antichrist and his kingdom. Those who eat his delicacies will destroy him. So that's a key component. The ones who eat the kings of the south's delicacies will destroy him, and the king of the south's army will be swept away. So that's internal. Those who are sitting at his table, meaning his commanders, his inside people, his key personnel, they are the ones that are going to rise up and destroy him. So whoever the king of the south is and whatever army they create, there's going to be internal conflict, and it's going to destroy them from within. Now, many will be slain in battle during this battle that will take place between the Antichrist empire and the king of the south. These two kings, with their hearts bent on evil, they're going to sit at the table and they're going to try to negotiate, but what they're doing is they're speaking lies. It's going to be to no avail. So it's going to be to know this negotiation that they're going to try to sit at the table against, and they're going to be speaking lies to each other. There's not going to be anything that comes out of it. There will be no peace agreement, because the end will still come at the appointed time. So this seeming peace is not going to do anything, or these seeming negotiations won't do anything. The time of the end will still come. Then the king of the north, that's the Antichrist, will return to his own land with great wealth. So the king of the north will plunder against the king of the south, and he's going to return with he's going to conquer a lot, and he's going to take a lot of money. Again, think Hitler. Every time Hitler went in and invaded, he had a tremendous amount of money and plunder that he was able to take. The vast treasures that he took from different lands, the art treasure, the gold treasure, the financial treasures, the land treasures, he was able to take it. He accomplished a great wealth. But here's the key. The Antichrist, his heart will always be set against the Holy Covenant. He will long to destroy Israel. He will take action, and then he will return to his own land. So that's the picture. The picture is there's a great battle in the Middle East. Israel has not yet been brought into this. They are not involved, but there is a battle that is taking place where the king of the south is rising up against the king of the north, the Antichrist, trying to stop them. But when that can't happen, the Antichrist army will destroy the king of the south. In fact, the king of the south will be destroyed from within, because of people within his own cabinet, his own people that he trusted will actually take him down. But the Antichrist empire will take a tremendous amount of plunder and wealth, go back to his country, but he will have his heart set against Israel. That's always his focus. His focus is, yes, the Middle East, but I want the Holy Covenant. I want Israel to be destroyed. He will go to his own land, and then he will do some kind of an action, but he will go back to his homeland. But his eyes and his focus are always on the destruction of Israel. Let's wrap up the before the Great Tribulation events with this next slide. Daniel goes on to say that the Antichrist, he says, at the appointed time. So the appointed time, now that is a reference to God's hand, God's sovereignty. So God's sovereignty is over all. He is a sovereign God. He is in control of the times and in control of the situation. So I think sometimes we have to really balance out the free will of mankind with the sovereignty of God, that two of those things really work hand in hand, and we're not really quite sure how all of it works out to a perfect detail. We just know that God is sovereign and he has appointed the time. He has appointed the times and the dates that these things will happen. At the appointed time, he, that is the Antichrist, will invade the south again. So this will be a second invasion. Again, it's the Middle East turmoil, and this army that is in the south, the Antichrist will come from the north, and he will attack the army of the south. Now, what is the army of the south going to consist of? Again, the question is one that we don't really have a specific answer to, but we know that the Antichrist will attack the army of the south. He will do it again. Only this time, the outcome will not be as before. So how was the outcome before? Well, the outcome before was that the king of the south was betrayed by his own people. It was an inside job, and the Antichrist won. He took a lot of plunder and spoil from the south, and he went back home. Again, he had his rage set toward the Holy Land, the Holy Covenant. Now he's going to attack the south a second time, but this time the Antichrist will not win. So if you are under the impression that the Antichrist is just going to win and have no one stand up against him, that's a wrong interpretation and a wrong understanding. The Antichrist will find people coming against him. He will find a opposition. Again, think World War II. Hitler, in his reign, he had the Axis powers that joined with him, but Hitler was opposed by the Allies. He was opposed by incredible forces, and that's the same thing here. The Antichrist will come against the South, but this time he is not going to win. Why? Because the ships of Kittim will come against him. So there will be warships that are coming against him. There will be armies coming against him, and he will lose heart. So the Antichrist does not always win everything. The whole world does not fall to the power of the Antichrist. Again, this is a Middle Eastern conflict that all of the world is brought into, and all of the world is pulled into this situation. When Daniel talks about the whole world, the whole known world at the time of Daniel was the Middle Eastern world. The whole world was not really discovered or part of the whole system that was going on here. So this is a Middle Eastern conflict that is occurring. The Antichrist is not going to win every battle, and in this particular case, the Antichrist is going to have opposition, and he is not going to win like he did before. He's going to lose heart. He's going to turn back, and when he turns back, he will vent his rage against the Holy Covenant. So now, when the Antichrist has to retreat back into the north, the rage is going to be against he's going to set up a rage against the Holy Covenant, so he will rage against Israel. That is always the focus of the Antichrist. He is always raging against Israel. Now, when he returns to his land, he will favor those who with him forsake the Holy Covenant. So he is going to favor other countries that will join with him in coming against Israel. Now, what are the other countries that will come against Israel? Well, that could be everyone, the way that the whole world is turning against Israel today. So he will favor those who come against the Holy Covenant. So he is not going to just take over and rule the world, despite what we may think. There will be opposition to the Antichrist every step of the way. He will not run roughshod over the entire world. People will stand up against him. Armies will stand up against him. This again is primarily a Middle Eastern conflict that is going on. Now the whole world will be brought into this war. It will be World War III, but not everyone will stand with him. People will stand in opposition, like the army of the South that just stood in opposition, and the Antichrist did not win this time. When he did not win, again, he turns his rage toward Israel. Again, these are all of the events that are leading up to the time of tribulation, because now he is going to turn his attention on to Israel. Israel will now become the focus, and this is where the time of great tribulation really starts to occur. So let's check it out. Okay, so those are the events that happen before the Great Tribulation. So Jesus says it's going to be the Great Tribulation, or Revelation says the tribulation, the Great One. That will happen in that 3.5 year mark, that the during the tribulation events will kick in. So all of the events take place before the tribulation, whether that's for 3.5 years or whether it's extended even before that. But most likely it's going to occur in this time period, and we will see the rise of the Antichrist that will probably happen before this. So we will see the rising up of the Antichrist here or here in some manner. The rise of the Antichrist also corresponds with seal number 1 that is broken in the book of Revelation, and we'll look at that when we get there. So now let's switch our gears to during the tribulation. Now, during the tribulation, we're looking at from right here, this event here, to the end. So this final 3.5 year period is the during the tribulation event. So let's kick into this and understand what it means. Let's pick it up in chapter 11 of Daniel, verses 31 through 45. Let's look what it says. So here's what Daniel says. And these are the during the tribulation events. Remember, the focus of the Antichrist is on Israel. He will withdraw because he will be met with some kind of opposition from the king of the south in his second invasion of the south. And he will be met with some kind of an opposition that will rise up, forcing him to go back to his homeland. But his focus, both times after his conquest against the south, is always toward Israel. That's where his focus is. That's where his mind is. That's what his ultimate goal is, to destroy Israel. Now, what's going to happen is his forces, that is the Antichrist's forces, they're going to rise up. They will rise up and they will profane the fortified temple. So they are going to have a target on Israel, and there are events that are going to happen leading up to the targeting of Israel, or targeting of the temple. So what's going to happen in that 3.5 years? Well, somewhere in here, there is going to be some kind of a covenant that is going to be made with the people of Israel. The covenant will be some kind of an agreement, some kind of a peace agreement that will be made to the point that Israel feels secure. There will be a temple. The temple will have been rebuilt. I don't know if it will be rebuilt during the 3.5 year period or if it will happen outside of that 3.5 year period, but the temple will be rebuilt. A covenant will be made between the Antichrist and Israel. That's where the covenant will be made. Israel will feel at peace. They will let their guard down. This covenant that will be made was spoken of, and I'm going to refer to that in just a couple of minutes. In the book of Daniel, it was spoken of in the book of 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians. So there's going to be some some agreement that is made, some kind of a peace agreement is made between the Antichrist and Israel, yet he is constantly looking at Israel. Now, what was known in the Muslim world is the constant breaking of covenants. They would make a peace agreement and they would not stick to the peace agreement. They would break the peace agreement as soon as it benefited them or as soon as the forces or the numbers were in their favor. So look for that to happen. There will be a peace agreement, but at the right time, they will break the agreement. How will they break the agreement? Well, his forces are going to rise up and they are going to profane, they will profane the temple. They will stop the daily offering and set up the abomination of desolation. This is the key event, the abomination of desolation. This is the key event that Jesus talked about. It's the key event that Paul talked about, the setting up of the abomination of desolation. So, what will they do? They will stop the daily things that are going on in the temple, the daily offerings, the daily prayers, the daily sacrifices. Sacrifices in that day was, or in the day of the functioning of the temple is more than just a blood sacrifice and a killing. There was also grain offerings. There were the incense prayers that would rise up. There was all kinds of activity that would go on in the temple. Whatever was going on, the Antichrist is going to rise up with his forces and profane the temple and stop the daily offering that is going. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes did this exact same thing. He made an agreement with the people, he broke the agreement, and he stopped everything that was going on in the temple. How do we know that Antiochus Epiphanes is not who Daniel is talking about? Well, it's because Jesus and Paul both refer to these being future events. Antiochus Epiphanes was just a type of the thing that is going to come. The Antichrist will turn his attention and his gaze toward Israel. He will have some kind of a covenant that will happen, some kind of a peace agreement that will happen, but at some point, the halfway point, the 3.5 year point, he will rise up with his forces will rise up, they will profane the fortified temple, they will stop the daily offering, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. Jesus talks about this event happening, and he gives a specific warning. I'll look at that in just a minute. The Antichrist will use smooth words, and he will seduce those who act wickedly against the covenant. In other words, he will seduce with his words those who come against Israel. He will buddy up with anybody in the world who will stand against Israel, which is most of the world, will stand against Israel. Not everyone will, but a majority of the world will. They will stand against Israel. They will turn their backs on Israel. He will buddy up with them and he will seduce them, and he will give some kind of an agreement with all of those who also with him join in acting wickedly against the covenant, against Israel. That's so you can substitute that word, who act wickedly against Israel. But the people who know their God, that is the Christians, they know their God, will stand strong and prevail. Those who are wise among the people will instruct many. You're going to see many people come to the Lord in those days. Though for many days they will fall by the sword. So people will stand up. They will stand up for God. There will be people who trust God, who believe in God, who walk with God. There could be among those, there could be some Orthodox Jews that join into that group. They will stand up and they will fall by the sword. Again, this was foreshadowed in Antiochus Epiphanes and during his time. Not only will they fall by the sword, or they will be burned, they will be captured, or they will be pillaged. When they stumble, they will receive a little help. So there are a handful of people in the world that will still help them, but many will join them deceitfully. Even some of the wise will stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will still come at the appointed time. So all of these events will not stop God's timetable. The end, the day of the Lord, will still come. the end will still come. You cannot stop the end from coming. It will still come at its appointed time. So what is going to happen during this time? People are going to be killed. People are going to be burned. People are going to be captured. People are going to be pillaged. The world will turn against Israel. A handful will still help Israel, but many will not, because many will join with the coalition forces and act deceitfully. The wise, even followers, will stumble. That is what Paul talks about as the great falling away. The wise will stumble. And in their stumbling, though, they will be refined, they will be purified, they will be made spotless. So the time of stumbling will help to refine them. It will help to purify them, as every trial does. Now, everything I just read is paralleling what Jesus himself said in Matthew 24. Let's just look at that real quick. And I want you to, in your mind, think of the parallels between what I just read and what Jesus himself says. Jesus says, so when you see the abomination of desolation, look, remember the timeline, that 3.5 year mark. When you see the abomination of desolation, when you see the abomination of desolation that is spoken of through Daniel the prophet, where is it spoken of? Daniel chapter 11, we just read it. When you see that one standing in the holy place, what is the holy place he is standing in? That is the temple of God. The temple that has been rebuilt, the temple, and they had the covenant agreement that it had to happen. That temple that has been rebuilt with offerings and sacrifices. In that temple, the Antichrist will put an end to the daily offerings. He will put an end to the temple activities. He will come into the temple and set up the abomination of desolation, which is a person that is the Antichrist himself. When you see the Antichrist standing in the temple of God, in the holy place of God, the holy of holies of God, let the reader understand. Jesus then gives a warning, because he's saying that in this time there is going to be great turmoil and chaos. In that time, if you are in Judea, which is where Jerusalem is located, if you are in that area, flee, get out of town, run to the mountains. If you're on the roof, don't go back in to take what is yours in the house. Don't worry about your belongings. Get out of town. If you're in the field, don't even turn back to get your coat. Run. Woe to those who are pregnant, to those that are nursing babies in those days. Pray that your escape will not happen in the winter or on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. Why would you not want it to happen in the winter? Because it's cold and it's going to be tough, and it's just going to compile on all of the difficulties of trying to get out of there if it's winter. And pray that it's not on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. Why? Because the Orthodox Jews, if it is Sabbath, they're not going to go anywhere. They're just not going to move. They're not going to break their tradition and break the law to get out of the community, out of the country, out of the city. They're just going to create one large bottleneck because of their unwillingness to actually move. So in Daniel, it says that when this king comes and he sets up and he comes against the temple, he is going to kill, he's going to destroy, he is going to do horrific things. He's going to speak smooth words to seduce others to come along with him. He will stand against the people of Israel. The people who will stand with Israel will be killed by sword or burned or captured or pillaged. They're going to have little help. Little in the world are going to come to the aid of Israel. Very, very few. They're going to let Israel burn and let Israel suffer and let Israel be taken over by this abomination of desolation, by this Antichrist. Jesus says, look, for then there will be great trouble. So this is the time of great trouble. Great trouble starts. Now, in the Old Testament, this is called Jacob's trouble. And there are several prophecies that talk about this event happening. This will be the time of Jacob's trouble. It will be the greatest time of tribulation. And Jesus warns and says that this event has not happened. There has been no trouble like this, such as not has happened since the beginning of the world until now or ever will. This will be the greatest trouble that the world has ever seen. This will be the greatest war that the world has ever seen. This will be the greatest time of trouble that Israel has ever seen. And this is all spoken of in Daniel. So if you want to understand what Jesus means in Matthew 24, starting in verse 15 through 21, just turn to the book of Daniel chapter 11 and you will see the events happen. The time of before the tribulation, and now you have the time that is during the tribulation. And how is the time kicked off during the tribulation? It all happens with the Antichrist breaking the covenant that he has made with the people of Israel, turning his forces toward Jerusalem, entering into the temple, taking the temple, stopping the daily offerings and sacrifices and activities of the temple, and proclaiming himself to be God while being in the temple. That is the Abomination of Desolation events. Now, Paul writes about this and Paul talks about this. It's also spoken of in the book of Daniel. I've already covered this, but I want to reiterate this. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, here's how the lead up occurs in this timeline. This is the abomination event, 3.5 years. He, that is the Antichrist, will make a firm covenant here. A covenant will be made. And a peace agreement will be made, some kind of an agreement between the Antichrist and between Israel, so much so that Israel lets its guard down. He will make this covenant with many, and it will be for 1 week, so it will be the beginning. The book of Revelation, seal number 1, is a rider that is sent out, and the rider is on a white horse, and the rider is the Antichrist who is sent out. That is the beginning of the time of trouble. And so here's what happens. In the book of Revelation, Revelation 6, then I saw the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals. Now remember, the vision of Daniel is sealed until the time that it's time to go. The first seal is broken. The first one is broken. Chapter 6 of the book of Revelation. And I heard one of the 4 living creatures say, "Come," and I looked, and behold, there was a white horse. The one riding on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him. He went out as a conqueror, so that he might conquer. Now, why is he on a white horse? Because he is the Antichrist. He is the antithesis of Christ. He is the exact opposite of who Jesus is. Now, at the end, Jesus will come on a white horse and he will distribute his wrath upon the world. But right now, you have the Antichrist riding out and he is conquering with a bow. He is coming out conquering with a bow and a crown. Conquering what? Conquering the Middle East, conquering Israel. This is the beginning of the 7-year period. Daniel 9 says at the beginning of the 7-year period, he will make a covenant. So that could very well be the catalytic event that we see happen at the beginning, is that when you see a peace agreement made between the Antichrist and Israel, so that Israel feels safe and secure, that Israel can worship in safety and security in the temple, you can probably guess that this is the beginning of the final 7 years. He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. What is 1 week? Well, we've already discussed that. That's a heptad. That's a 7-year period. But in the middle of the week, in the middle of the 7-year period, at the 3.5-year mark, he's going to put an end to the sacrifice, to the offering, and he's going to set up an abomination of desolation. It will come one who destroys, who will sit on the throne in the temple of God until the decreed annihilation comes at the end, which is the wrath of God that is poured out upon all. Here's what Paul says in he's going to say this in 1 Thessalonians and then in 2 Thessalonians. For you yourselves know very well that the day of the Lord comes like a thief in the night. What is the day? That is the return of the Lord, the coming back of Jesus. When all of Israel are saying shalom and safety, we feel at peace, we've made a covenant. but then sudden destruction comes upon them like a woman having birth pains in the womb. There is no way that they will escape. What is that? Well, that again is that mark. It is we feel shalom and safety. We have a covenant. But in the middle, in the 3.5 year mark, there will be sudden destruction. Sudden destruction will happen. And when you see that, now you are in the end. It's the end game. It's the great tribulation occurring, and there is no way to escape it. It's going to happen. And this area in here, this area, this is going to be bad. It is going to be a time like we have never seen in our world before. So we can be watching the events. What are we going to watch? We're going to watch for the rising up of an Antichrist and an empire. We're going to watch for a covenant that is being made between the people of Israel. We're going to watch for the temple of God being reconstructed in Israel so that Israel can once again reestablish the Orthodox idea of worship of God. When we see those events come to pass, you will know we are right there at the end, especially when you see the covenant, and it looks like the covenant is going to occur at the very beginning, that will be the kickoff event for the 7 years of tribulation. But the seals are broken, chapter 6 of Revelation, and the Antichrist goes riding out on a white horse to conquer and to be a conqueror, it says. Now, one other thing that Paul says, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, let no one deceive you in any way. For the day, what is the day? It's the day of the Lord's return. It will not come unless the rebellion comes first. What is the rebellion? The rebellion is the apostasy. The apostasy, the becoming an apostate, turning my back on Jesus. If you turn your back on Jesus, you are an apostate. You are committing apostasy. It will not happen until many fall away, until the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed. That is the Antichrist, the one who is destined to be destroyed at the end. He opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he sits in the temple of God proclaiming himself that he is God. So he will, at that 3.5 year mark, he will sit in the temple of God, and he will proclaim himself that he is God. That's what Paul says. But that's also exactly what the book of Daniel says. So let's keep going in the book of Daniel with the events that are happening during the time of tribulation. So let's look. So Daniel chapter 11 picks it up right here. He says this. So the king, now this is after he has turned his forces against Israel, after he has stopped the temple worship and the temple offerings, after he has come in and set up the abomination of desolation, as he has seated himself in the temple of God, then the king, that is the Antichrist, he is the king of the north, he will do as he pleases. And here's what he will do. He will exalt and he will magnify himself above every god. He will set himself up as God of this world. He will speak outrageous thing against the God of gods. Who's the God of gods? That is Adonai. That is Yahweh. That is the God of the Bible. He will speak outrageous. What are the outrageous things that he will speak? Well, we don't know. But he will speak outrageous things, and you're going to know it when he says it, because it's going to be very obvious. He will, who is the he? That is the Antichrist, will prosper. He will prosper. This is going to be good for him. He is going to prosper until, and that's a big until. A little side note, if you want to do a good Bible study, look at the words until when it deals with the end times. They're great pivotal words to understand the Old Testament, or to understand the end times. He will start and he will proclaim himself. He will speak outrageous things against God. He will magnify himself above every god. He will do as he pleases. He will exalt himself. He will say outrageous things against Adonai. The Antichrist will prosper until the time of wrath. Where's the time of wrath? That is the return of Jesus. The day of wrath is also the return of Jesus, who comes conquering, who comes, and Revelation says it's the great winepress of God, it's the grapes of wrath. That's where Jesus comes back and he absolutely destroys the day of Jesus, the return of God, the day of wrath. The Antichrist, during this time, he will prosper. He will exalt himself to be God. He will say outrageous things against the God of gods. He will do this until the wrath is completed. For what has been decided will be done. In other words, God is sovereign and he is going to make it happen. This is God's doing. God has decided beforehand how it's going to play out. All of the events have really been preordained by God. He will, again, who's the he? That is the Antichrist. The Antichrist will show no regard for the gods of his fathers. So if he's coming out of the Ottoman Empire, he will not show regard for the Muslim God or the God desired by women, the Muslim God. Nor will he show any regard for, or no, show regard for any God, but instead, what is he going to do? He will exalt himself above all. He will proclaim himself. The Antichrist will say, I am God. I am God. There are no others. I am God. You must follow me. I am God. You must take the seal. You must take the mark of the beast, the mark of my reign as God. He will set up his rule. He will set up his reign, and he will proclaim, I am God. There are no others. Instead of these, he, the Antichrist, will honor a God of fortresses, a God his fathers did not acknowledge. He will honor with gold, silver, precious stones, and costly things. So he will take the Muslim God and completely begin to honor someone that not even the Muslims would have done or would have followed. Not only that, the Antichrist will attack others, strong fortresses, with the help of a foreign god, and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. So as other countries join in with him, as other countries bow down with him, he will just keep toppling countries and kingdoms one after the other around the world. And any of those who join forces with him, he will honor them and acknowledge them. He will honor those who have bowed the knee to him. And he will give them authority over many and will parcel out land for a price. So he will begin to take the whole compass of the earth. He will take the whole earth. He will go out conquering. Other kingdoms will join him, and they will keep toppling kingdoms one after the other. And he will give the kings of those kingdoms land, and he will start redividing and setting up new boundaries across the world of new lands that he has conquered. So during these 3.5 years, it is going to be absolutely intense. He will say, I am a God. You need to honor me. People will be forced to take his mark upon them, the mark of the beast. That's the mark of the Antichrist. It's not a vaccine. It is not Bill Gates. It is the mark of the Antichrist, who is not on the scene yet. So you can't possibly take the mark if he is not on the scene. It's not taking a chip in your hand to buy or sell a computer chip. That's not what it is. It has to do with the Antichrist himself. You will take his mark. You will honor him. You will join forces with him, and if you do acknowledge him, if you do greatly honor him, he will acknowledge you, and he will give all of these other kingdoms over new lands that he is parceling out. So those are the events that it's talking about happening at that time and in those days. Just a couple more verses, and we'll wrap this up. Now, at the time of the end, so now we're approaching the time of the end in the book of Daniel. So the timeline, if we pick it up here in the 3.5 years where he says he does this abomination of desolation event, he sets himself up to be God. He says, I am God. He conquers. People bow down to him. People honor him. He does all kinds of bizarre worship things. People take his seal, which is the mark of the beast, upon him, upon themselves, the time of the end is going to come. At the time of the end, as we're approaching in here near the end, the king of the south will also rise up again. So it's not going to be the whole world. There are going to be people and bands of people that will rise up against him. In this particular case, the king of the south will attack him. And the king of the north, that's the Antichrist, the king of the north, will storm out against the king of the south with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. So think of it in modern terms. It would be with tanks, aircraft, with drones, with missiles, with whatever. He is going to come out against the land, the king of the south. He will invade lands and pass through them like an overflowing river. So he is going to think of a river that's overflowing, just encompasses the land on the banks as far as it wants to go. You can't stop it. Well, that's what the Antichrist is going to be like. He's going to just march through the world. Not every part of the world. There will be people that stand up against him, but he has a desire to take over everything, and they will be unable to stop him because he's going to be like an overflowing river. He's also going to invade the beautiful land. He's going to invade not just Jerusalem, he's going to stomp out every part of Israel. Many are going to be overthrown, but these will escape from his hand. Edom will, Moab will, and the chief of the sons of Ammon will. He will extend his hand against other countries. The land of Egypt will not escape, so he's going to come against the north part of Africa. He will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, as well as all of the riches of Egypt. All of the wealth of Egypt will be in his hands. Then also the Libyans and the Cushites will also be under his feet. Where is that? Well, that is the eastern part of Africa. That would be the Sudan. That would be Somalia. All of these countries. Libya is going to be in the north. Egypt. He's going to take over all of northern, probably, and central Africa, and the eastern side of Africa as well. Everything is going to be under his feet. He is just going to expand his kingdom little by little with power, and people will be unable to stop him. And then other forces are going to join with him because they don't want his wrath. And it's just going to be a toppling effect, a domino effect in countries around the world, and then he will redivide the boundary lands and give them to the ones that were loyal to him and followed him. Now, one final set of verses that I want to look at, just a couple more verses when it comes to the during the events timeline. All right, so quickly, one final thought. So in the timeline, in the events, and we've seen these events from, and I'm just picking it up from the 3.5-year mark, we have that abomination of desolation. We have him proclaiming himself to say, I am God. We have him saying outrageous things against the God of the Bible, Yahweh, against Adonai. We have him conquering other countries. We have others bowing down to him and joining forces with him. We have countries that are being toppled left and right. This is a great time of war. Think of the Blitzkrieg of Germany. This is the kind of events that are happening. But not everybody will join him. This is not going to be world domination. There will be some who will stand up against the Antichrist and not stand with him. They may not love Israel, but they're not going to stand against, or they're not going to let the Antichrist just take over everything. They will come against him. And here's what's going to happen at the end, near the end times of the tribulation, somewhere in these times. It says this, but reports from the east and from the north are going to alarm him, and he will set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. Reports from the east and the north. What could possibly be the east and the north? That could be the area of China. It could be the area of Russia, the east and the north, or it could be the European Union, or coming through the north in some way. He's going to hear some kind of report of an army that is gathering in China. He's going to hear of things that are happening in either Russia or the European Union that are going to be coming against him, and that's going to alarm the Antichrist to the point that he is going to, in great rage, knowing that, my time is at hand. So I'm going to destroy and annihilate as many people as I possibly can. So think about what Hitler did at the time when he knew his time was coming short. In great rage, Hitler destroyed and annihilated as many Jews as he possibly could in in the concentration camps, in the gas chambers. He annihilated and destroyed. He picked up the pace tremendously as he approached the end. As the Antichrist is hearing reports from the east and from the north, that's going to trouble him to the point that he is going to radically increase the destruction and the annihilation of the Jewish people and Christians as much as he possibly can until the end comes. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. Now, what would be between the seas? So picture the coast of Israel. You've got the Mediterranean Sea, and you have Jerusalem over here. That's the holy mountain, Jerusalem. Um, well, I put the U in the wrong place. Jerusalem. He says he will pitch his tents between the Mediterranean and Jerusalem. What is between the Mediterranean and Jerusalem? It's Tel Aviv. And what's the Tel Aviv? What do they have in Tel Aviv? It's not only the most modern city in Israel, but you also have Ben Gurion Airport. The Ben Gurion International Airport is right there in Tel Aviv. So where is he going to set up his tents and his mountains? He's going to set up his headquarters right there in Tel Aviv at the airport, most likely in Tel Aviv. He will be troubled by the reports that come to him by these armies that are going to come against him. He's going to wipe out as many Jews as he possibly can, as many Christians as he can in the meantime, and then he's going to pitch his tents here, yet he will meet his doom with no one to help him. So the reign of the Antichrist will come to an end somewhere here near the end of all of the events that are happening. For 3.5 years, he will conquer. He will declare himself as a god. He will just run roughshod over Israel. He will run over the countries around him. People will come to his side. But then the armies will gather and come against him, and he will come to his end. The Antichrist will meet his doom because of the things that are coming against him, and ultimately because of the wrath of God, because of the day of the Lord, will take place at the end. Okay, well, that's all of the events that Daniel talks about that are during the tribulation. Next time, we're going to get into the events that happen after the tribulation. So we will pick it up in chapter 11, in chapter 12, verse 1 of the book of Daniel. So that'll be for next time. And I want to thank you for joining me and being a part of this study here today. And I hope that it was helpful. I hope that you learned some things, and I hope that all of this begins to make a little bit of sense of the events that we are looking for. Again, what do we need to look for? The rebuilding of the temple, the rise of an Antichrist and his empire, and a covenant agreement between the Antichrist and the nation of Israel. Be watching for a 10-nation coalition to come about, and the Antichrist destroying 3 of those kings and taking hold of the entire empire for himself. So be watching for these events to take place. The events that are happening in Israel today are just a precursor of the things that are going to come. These are not the events, but they are giving us a good indication of the kind of events that are going to be coming our way in the not too distant future. We don't know when that is, but we are getting our hearts prepared for the coming of the Lord, that we can look forward to the day of his return. Well, God bless you, and thank you for joining me. Join me back here next week as we dive deeper into the book of Daniel, deeper into our end times Bible study. Until then, have a great week.